To my left, immediate left, we have Andrew McCaskill.
Yes.
Andrew is a former member of the IPG family, but we'll forgive you.
A proud Weber alum.
And is now the Senior Vice President of Global Communications from Nielsen. So, Andrew, do you want to tell us about yourself and your thoughts about what privilege means?
Privilege, sure. My name is Andrew McCaskill. I'm Senior Vice President of Global Communications at Nielsen. Nielsen, many of you may know us for television ratings, but we operate in 106 countries around the world doing consumer data. And so my role in global communications can be really, really taxing, I guess you could say. I started my career in Atlanta doing PR, primarily in the tech industry, and had stints at Coke, had stints at Turner Broadcasting, but really fell in love with PR. Now I'm doing PR and U.S. consumer marketing because I focus on multicultural. And because multicultural is the future of America, based on our data, that is now considered U.S. consumer marketing. We're no longer doing multicultural as a sliver. We are now marketing to a multicultural world, which is good news for all of you. Privilege for me, the way I think about it is, there's a brief illustration and I'll go really quickly. So it's like, privilege is like having a mouse and an elephant in the same room. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Privilege is like having a mouse and an elephant in the same room. That mouse has to understand everything about that elephant to survive in that room. It has to understand how that elephant responds when it's upset, how that elephant eats, how it sleeps. Just to survive, it has to understand everything about that elephant. The elephant in that room can be blithely unaware that the mouse even exists, right? That not having to worry about another entity or not even having to think about or be aware of someone else is privilege. That is the epitome of privilege. We all have some modicum of privilege. I work in an industry where about 80% of the industry is women. And I am a man who has always had teams of women working for me. I'm Black, I'm gay, I'm from the South. Nobody has more shit coming against them than me in my right? But as a man in power, I have a modicum of privilege that I have to be aware of as it relates to the women who report to me and who have reported to me over the years. And I have to be aware of that privilege and aware of how that privilege impacts those women that I work with if I'm not aware and if I'm not intentional about how I use said privilege.
Mm-hmm. That's really, thank you so much for that. Sitting to Andrew's left is J.D. Michaels. He is Executive Vice President and Director of Creative Engineering. And he also is the Co-Director of Diversity for BBDO. I don't know if you remember that we were on a panel together like 100 years ago at NMSDC. I don't know, do you remember that? I didn't have pink hair then, but. Okay. So, JD, what does privilege mean to you?
Hi. I didn't hear you say anything back. Hi. That's so much better. Hi, I'm J.D. Michaels. I grew up in Kansas City, and then I went to college at Yale University, and then I moved to San Francisco. I've had a lot of different places that I've lived. In each place, the social hierarchy has always been different. So in Kansas City, it would have been really good if I would have been able to sink a three-pointer, or let's be honest, a two-pointer, or any pointer whatsoever. But I was kind of smart, so that was all right. Then I went to Yale. It was okay to be smart, but I didn't have any money. So when everybody's like, oh my gosh, you want to go to Vail for the weekend? I was like, yeah, I want to, and I'll continue wanting that. Then I moved to San Francisco, and I got to work there was no economy back then. Most of you weren't born, but we didn't have an economy. So people who had gone to Harvard Law School were trying to get jobs at Burger King. Anything, just to have work. So then it was just the fact that I could work and do anything. So I never got to that point where who I was it just gave me that extra little edge ever. And it still disturbs me. The weird part is then I got involved in advertising, and advertising is the business of speaking to everyone. It doesn't matter if you know them, it doesn't matter if you like them. Very often you have to speak to people who wouldn't allow you in their house. So I had to think about privilege in terms of the voice that we're communicating with and the people we're communicating to. We have to make sure to say things in a way that people will understand. So there were two good moments where I kind of understood what privilege was. I always thought privilege was having more of something. And then I realized that it really wasn't having more, it was about advantage. Privilege was that somebody had an advantage over someone else. So I would use phrases like, let's level the playing field. And then I got told, well, that's not how the world works. If you level the playing field for everybody to be even and nobody has any sort of advantage, then only the people that have the advantage win. Look at the Yankees. They can afford to get anybody on their team, so of course they're going to be the best. Well, that's not true. You have to have advantages of spirit, advantages of strength, other things. So then it was just about having the right opportunity. So for me, the idea of privilege is in some way rigging opportunity, and opportunity should be level for everyone. The second thing is, like you said, I had someone that's a great friend of mine, a woman who happens to be a white woman in her 20s. She works with me for many years, and finally one day just out of the blue said, you know, everybody talks about privilege, and I understand that you think that it's this thing about more and less. I realize I don't have to think about a lot of things you have to think about. Privilege is not having to think about things. I raise my hand and taxis stop. I have no part of my day spent worried about it. But you leave a bar at 2 in the morning and you walk home and you don't have things to think about. So the things we don't have to think about, that time, that space, that's our privilege. And some people use that time to further their careers or their families. But for those of us who have to think about many things, we don't have that time. We just spend time surviving. And that gives them an advantage.
Can we go?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marjanae Moore-Roberts. I'm the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Golan, part of the IPG family. Prior to joining Golan in May, I was the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity for Yahoo. So, new industry for me. Some of the issues for diversity and inclusion are actually very much the same. So I'm excited to tackle them in this context. I agree with Andrew and with JD. A lot of privilege is contextual. It depends on where you're at, what you're trying to do, what your goals are. And one of the ways I've always talked about it is in terms of the same way we all want to have a presumption of innocence in the world when it comes to the legal system. We want to have a presumption of competence when we go to work, when we apply for jobs, when we're up for promotions. And I think we want to get to that point. It's not about stripping privilege or stripping that presumption of competence from people who already have it. It's about elevating that and making it available for everyone. And so within the context of these discussions, I often have white people come to me and say, I feel so guilty. What do I do with this privilege? And it really isn't about feeling guilty. It's about leveraging the privilege that you have or lending the privilege that you have to make sure everyone has that same presumption of competence when they're approaching their work or approaching a company. So I'm excited to have this conversation today. I think this panel has a lot of nuggets to drop. I'll try and drop some knowledge too, and looking forward to meeting some of you afterwards.
So,
Hey,
okay.
I'm Noel Cottrell, Chief Creative Officer at Fitzco in Atlanta. I've been there for 8 years. Quick bit of backstory. I sold my South African company to Interpublic Group of Companies 20 years ago and moved to America. But my definition of privilege was I played on the South African basketball team in the 80s, and it was an all-white basketball team in Africa. If you can imagine, that is the ultimate privilege. It's kind of, so but to bring it closer to home, I lecture and I'm on the board of the Creative Circus in Atlanta. And there was one day a couple of years ago when it kind of hit me. I was like, where are all the black people at the Creative Circus? And it was an interesting moment for me when I just looked around and realized the only people in the room who were people of color were scholarship people. They were there, and I thought about it for a while. So I went and looked up. Dr. Elenia Hudson was head of marketing at Morehouse. I looked her up, and I went over to Morehouse and offered to guest lecture at Morehouse. And I started guest lecturing at Morehouse and was astounded. No one knew about advertising. In the marketing class, no one considered advertising. There was one kid who started moving further and further to the front every time I lectured. And that kid landed up going to BBDO and doing the talk for P&G. I like to think in some ways I helped influence him. And we're going to talk about influence next and kind of how you're using your influence. But I think there was that, when you talk about privilege, I looked at everyone at the Creative Circus. There was a whole bunch of kids there who'd done an undergraduate degree somewhere and come into town, were being put up staying in a nice apartment, driving a car to the Creative Circus, and they were there, through the power of privilege. And there weren't a lot of African American kids in that class. There were normally one or two, and just going to Morehouse and kind of reaching out and speaking there, really, in my mind, was something I could do to help.
Yep. So we have very few minutes left, and haven't really.
I think the other one ran over by like 40 minutes, so I think we might be.
I think there's more than
Stephanie
that.
can help us.
Okay, so our clock is not correct. Okay, so I want to sort of piggyback on what everyone else has shared, and give you what I think privilege means, and sort of translate that and just tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do at IPG to disrupt privilege, and then we'll kind of share our experiences and how we're approaching things, I think, in terms of the formal roles and what we're doing in our organizations, and then maybe a little bit about how we do use the privilege that we have on a personal basis. So to me, privilege does start with influence and access, just access and being, part of whoever the in group is and whatever context you're in. There's also that assumption of credibility, expertise, authority, automatic respect, and again, the freedom of not having, to even think about it. And when you have that privilege, you're able to do things like open the doors of access to the influencers for those who aren't that privileged. You're able to do something that's very important in our industry, which is sponsorship, which is being, when you're in that room, where decisions are being made, you're able to advocate for people, and to say, give them that promotion, give them that assignment. Privilege can mean being able to contribute to changing systemic barriers, policies. And I think another piece of it is speaking truth to power. You're in the position to speak truth to power. At this point in my career, where I spent the first half in the business and the second half I've been in the D&I space, I have, I believe, acquired a certain level of privilege, depending on, where I am. I walk in the room, I don't have to worry that anyone, I don't even think about it. I know that they're going to listen to me, that they're going to respect my opinion, they're going to assume I know what I'm talking about. And, converting that into what I just described is, part of what I want to do personally, but it's also, I think, part of my role. So at IPG, I'm very lucky that I have very active CEO participation. Michael Roth feels like this is he owns this. I'm an enabler, and I'm the advisor, and then I'm the one that try to figure out how do we operationalize after, you kind of diagnose what the issues are. So one of the things is that we've had to be very intentional about people who haven't traditionally been in that privilege pool, so to speak. From, thinking about internships as what they have been, which is affirmative action for white men and women, because they have traditionally gone to, frankly, family and friends of executives and clients. And so that's one of the things that, fortunately, we have programs like this and MAPE, and you might want to talk about it, but also intentional about focus. So we have specific goals around hiring and promotions, and we pay attention to retention around people of color. We also measure their experience, whether they're getting feedback, whether it's fair. We're doing that in a more robust way, and we set targets specifically for people of color. And then we're testing out a lot of simple tools that can get to what happens between people, where the fairness begins and where the fairness, where it really matters. And, there are other things, but I think those are like really practical ways that we're trying to disrupt privilege with intention. And so why don't we start, with Andrew to talk a little bit about his experience with sort of the organizational expressions of privilege.
Sure. So I work at a corporation now, but I'm an agency guy. I spent more than 15 years in PR firms and agencies for the majority of my career. And agency life is hard on people of color. That's my personal opinion, but agency life is hard on people of color.
Yeah.
It is, you can oftentimes feel like an outsider in agencies where there are oftentimes very few black people, other black people, or other people of color there. The expectation is that, oh, Drew has a friend. JD, there's another black guy there. They'll be best friends. Well, what if I don't like his ass, right? So I've got one shot at a buddy. And so I think that privilege that comes with sort of the way people kind of group together in agencies can be really, really hard for us, particularly when you're othered in some sort of way. And agencies have to be very intentional about taking a different approach to retaining people of color and retaining your black or your Hispanic or your Asian talent or your gay and lesbian talent. And you have to step outside of that normal box to keep that person, because what works for your non-Hispanic white counterparts does not necessarily always work for you, right? A lot of times agencies can feel very much like a frat house or a sorority house, right? And so you as people of color who are going into those spaces or who are other in some other way, you have to know that sort of going in and understand that you have to find a balance. And the way that I found the balance and being successful in agency life was through my mentor. When I was in Atlanta, there's a gentleman named Rob Baskin who was head of a huge agency in Atlanta, and I just cold called him and asked him to be my mentor. We went to lunch lots of times, and Rob, I'm gonna be completely transparent with you guys, Lord knows how this is gonna show up on Twitter, but Rob helped me decode my white counterparts at work.
You needed a translator.
He helped me translate it, right? He helped me understand how to be able to, people say to you all the time, bring your whole self to work. None of my companies have ever needed my whole self. Like, you don't want all of me at work, right? That's not gonna be beneficial for any of us, right? But Rob helped me find what I was comfortable with sharing so that I could still go to drinks with my white counterparts and still have those conversations, but have what my grandmother called some soul to keep, right? Because my experience was that the rules were the same for everybody, but the consequences felt different for me as a man of color. That was my experience. And so having that mentor to bounce things off, I was like, are they saying this because I'm black? Are they giving me the black interns because I'm black? Am I on the Ailey project because I'm black? And he would say to me, sometimes, yeah. Now maximize it, make the most of it. Or I would say things to him like, our founder passed away. And I said, what do you take to white people's houses at a funeral? Because I didn't know, I'd never been to a white funeral, right? And he was like, oh, go pick up some croissants and do this, whatever. I was like, I loved that, right? And what I say that long-winded story to you to say that you're gonna need some help. Success doesn't come alone. As brilliant and as capable as you are, you're gonna need some help. Find a tribe and find mentors. You should not just have a mentor who looks exactly like you. Find a great Hispanic mentor or black mentor or gay mentor or female mentor, but don't feel like you have to only have that mentor, right? There's some great white people who could be your mentors, and that may be just as helpful to you in situations that you're in as your African American mentor or your black mentor. So I say that to say that's my experience.
Okay. A time check. Is that yellow light for real?
I don't.
Hello?
Stephanie,
Is this time clock correct?
is that the
We-
time slot for real?
Yes, it is 10:58, but perfect, thank you, perfect segue. We have decided to let you guys, do your full 45 minutes.
Okay.
All the other sessions have been pushed back by 10 minutes, maybe 15. But just to let you know, please don't scatter because we know that this is the meat of everything and we're here all day. So just get the rest of the message.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
so, all right, we got 15 minutes, y'all. No, how much time do we have?
Big
Is
money,
it-
big money, big money.
Is this right?
I would say let's go another 10.
Don't ignore this.
Okay.
Okay, I will watch you. I left my watch back there. Okay, thank you. So, JD.
The time? Lord help me. Okay. Two things. When I was in college, I took a comedy class freshman year. I'm a kid from Kansas City. I'm at Yale. And the guy teaching it said, so everybody here who's gone to sleep without dinner because you didn't have dinner or slept in the cold, raise your hand. And without thinking, I raised my hand, and about 4 other people raised their hand, and everybody else didn't raise their hand. And then I wanted to put my hand down. And then he points to us and says, you will understand comedy only through great suffering. Do you understand what comedy is really about? And then this really rich white guy next to me looked at me like, and I realized I suddenly in that class had some sort of knowledge that made it that I was gonna know something this guy didn't. And that did not seem like privilege. Let me just express that to you. And that's when I learned that some of those people that raised their hand are still my friends today. And it's only, and they weren't all black or anything. It's that experience bonded us together. So at BBDO, when I and Carla Mayers, who's my partner as a EVP of diversity, when we redefined diversity, I redefined it as your combination of passions, experiences, and choices. That's it. What you love, where you've been, what you do. Because that bonds you better than saying everybody 22 to 35, stand up. Because y'all don't know each other, just like that whole thing about us being friends. That's how I met Van Graves, by the way. It's like, you remind me of somebody. Have you met Van Graves? And then Van and I met each other like, oh, yeah. It's weird. Those are not the real bonds that you create necessarily. The bonds you create are through being in the room and through actively competing and working. So when we had the creative residency at BBDO, it works this way. We know you and talk to you at events like this. We say casually, hey, you should let us know what's going on. And it sounds casual, but then if you keep all year letting us know what goes on, we look at everything you're doing, and if you're one of the best in the world, we just call you and give you a job at your old job. Now, the reason we do that is because our ideas of privilege, there's some hard stops. You know, you have to be good at what you do. You have to have studied very hard. You have to have been creative. And for us, working with David Lubar's, He says, yeah, you can have a job here as long as you're better than anybody else. And he means it. So then it becomes, what are the intangibles to get you in the door? And for us, we found that some people are related to clients, or they know somebody on our staff, or they're best friends with somebody who's worked there for 20 years. And for people of color, there's not 20 or 30 years legacy for you to build that on. So Carla and I are your relatives. And what we give you is the privilege of being relatives with us. Now, I'll be honest, I ain't nothing. Really, let's be honest. But I'm enough that you can be my relative and I can say, oh, she's with me. It's a privilege of identity. And just because I am a known person and a trusted BBDOer for 15 years, if you go up to somebody and say, oh, I'm one of JD's people, they go, oh, and there's a whole lot in that. But it is enough to give you an identity that then you build off. Now, after that, you're on your own. You got to fight. You got to figure it out. You got to win. You can come to us because we're your relatives, but you're on your own fighting, because everything you get from that moment on belongs to you. You were not brought in because you're black. You were not brought in because you're gay. You were brought in because you were one of the best, and I say so. And then you prove it. And then you can take that wherever you want. 2 of them have taken it to Apple. Sadly, they are not with us. But the others that are with us and the people that are here today as part of that program are some of the best in the world. And they believed it, and then I believed it, and then they got the chance.
Yeah, I think those are important points. 2 things. One of them is, don't be afraid to bring your identity, who you are, what you've done, what your experiences are, to work. I think it's very different when you talk about bring your whole self to work. Doesn't mean bring your Saturday 7 a.m. self to work. It means your identity, the essence of who you are, your lived experience. And what I found for a long time, I was walking around trying to, can you tell I'm black? I'm just trying to hide who I was somehow, thinking people didn't see it. And that was actually more off-putting than it was when I was just being myself. When I was telling my story about being from Ohio and being from the Midwest and growing up poor, and that, I know what to do if the water gets turned off, right? You go down the basement and drain the hot water tank and take a bath, and it'll be back on someday, right? So this idea of trying to hide those experiences because you're trying to fit in, or because you think that's what other people want to see and want to understand, don't make that mistake. Own all of who you are. Choose selectively, to Andrew's point, what you want to show other people, but don't compromise your identity. And I think that's part of the point your professor was making, which is also a really beautiful point. The second thing I'll say is about these in-groups and out-groups. And I'll underscore what JD said. I think often it's difficult to get in the door, but once you do your work, what you bring to the table can be an incredible equalizer. You have to do the work of understanding the people who have the influence. You have to align yourself with people maybe who have the big account, who need that extra something that only you can give because of your experience. So look for the opportunity where there's a gap that I know I can fill, that I know I'm the only one who can fill. And align yourself with those people who are trying to do something bigger than what they're capable of doing without you, and fill in that gap. That's your entree to getting into an in-group. And then once you're there, work your butt off, show your secret sauce, bring all of what you have to the table, and then let the work speak for itself. I don't think there's anything that can really underscore the importance of your essence, your core identity, and your expertise. Bring it all.
So Noah, I really want you to talk about what you've been doing, using your privilege as a very important leader at Fitsco to sort of disrupt the privilege and create opportunities, because I think you're doing some amazing things.
Thanks so much. Yeah, the reason I'm sitting up here, I'm not sure how many of you know that the One Club for Creativity is actually started as a big award show. It still isn't a massive award show, and that one show pencil that you win is like the holy grail of certainly American advertising and global advertising to a large degree. And the reason I'm sitting up here is for the last 2 years, I've had African American people standing on stage holding up a pencil. This year, a gold, best in discipline, and 5 other pencils. And last year, I had Jean Tannis, also an African American creative, standing up holding a pencil on stage. So for 2 years, somehow I've managed to find people in Atlanta, Georgia, who were talented and brilliant, put them in the right position, and then let them loose on great briefs, and let them win pencils at the highest level. And I think what it is my message is to anyone who's recruiting, anyone who's in a powerful position in advertising, to leverage that position. It's hard freaking work. It's like, so for example, I had to go to Morehouse and lecture at Morehouse. I had to go there every week. I had to park on the other side of campus, walk across, help try to find these kids. Like, they weren't coming to me. I wasn't picking up the phone and phoning Greenberg Kirschenbaum in New York, and they weren't sending me 10 African-American candidates. I had to go and find these kids. And then to try and get them in, what was really difficult was, it was a whole nother level of difficulty because their books weren't what they should be. They hadn't gone to the creative circus. They weren't ready, ad ready. They came in as, one of the guys was kind of doing back-end, like developing and websites, and I had to bring him in, and this is someone who was earning good money doing that. I had to convince my agency that this was the right guy to hire, and I thought he could be a creative director. Then I had to convince the guys who's putting this guy on the team and saying, all right, you need this guy on your team. And they're like, well, I'm looking at his book, and he hasn't worked in this category before, and like, what's this kid going to know about Coca-Cola, or what's he going to know about that? How are we going to do it? Getting him in, then he's in. Then I've got to convince the client this is the right person for his position. Then I've got to try and make sure they get the right briefs, and make sure they're not just sitting on the briefs for Rick Ross and Larry's sources. Like, it's kind of like I have to make sure I can push the guy off and put him on the good briefs and let him loosen those good briefs. And then what was really interesting was, I'm just going to use one example. Sherman Winfield, and if anyone knows him, brilliant creative director, art director who works for me. And I put him on Coke 1000 songs last year. And what it started off was just a simple Coca-Cola brief. And Sherman had the insight to say, why don't we try surnames, which was interesting and blew that up. And for Coca-Cola, that was amazing. And why don't we try some other stuff? Why don't we do a song for every name on a Coke can? And that blew up. That won everything this year. He won 6 Cannes Lions this year. So that's great for us creatively. But what does it do for, if you're sitting in this room and you're a business lead, what is amazing is we pitched against all the best agencies in the country for the French's Mustard account, which is part of McCormick's. Sitting in that room, Sherman said something that just triggered with the client. He said, when my mom's cooking, she puts red cap in everything. And the client said, excuse me, what did you say? He said, she puts red cap in everything. And she was like, that's what we call McCormick spices, because it's got a red cap. All the white people in the room were like, what the fuck's he talking about? We pitched, we won the account. They sent Sherman's mother a basket of McCormick's products. It's a big account, it's a national account. They then also gave us Stubbs and Lowry's based on Sherman and what he knew. It's unbelievable. I think he played such a big part in that. None of us could have connected with the client in that way. And they were all white clients sitting in the room, but Sherman connected, and Sherman's mother baked a pound cake and sent it back to them. It was this amazing thing that just happened, and it's a big chunk of business. And it came about through going back, all the way back, to trying to find those people and so it's hard work. And I think that if you're in a position of power, position of privilege, you've got to give these kids a chance, and they're going to literally blow your way, and it'll change your business. I was at Fitsco for 8 years. We would win one bronze pencil here, like one bronze line there. I put Sherman, Jean Tannis, 2 talented African-American creative directors in charge of pieces of business. We won everything. And it's just the amazing, amazing ability and power of hiring different people makes everything better. It's like a gumbo. Just put them all together and it's going to blow up. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And I want to say something. That contribution from Sherman didn't just happen. Noel and his leadership had to create an environment and a context where he felt comfortable throwing that out in a client meeting.
Yeah.
And that is, I guess, if I think about my personal privilege, one of the things that I'm working hard to do is to help create or revisit, what our leadership archetypes look like. The sort of what I think are very rigid notions of how to get work done, who can do it well, what leaders look like, what people behave like. because when you bring in different people, they really do think differently
Absolutely.
about how work gets done, about the ideas that are valuable to put on the table, like the red cap. And if you're not ready for that, and if you aren't consciously thinking, rethinking everything,
Right.
we're just never going to be successful. We have done that thing where we wanted to take people who are different and kind of dust them up and fix them up so they can fit in how we do things now, how we think about creative processes now. And that's not just why our industry has failed, that's why all industries
Yeah.
have failed. And to do that, you actually have to help people think differently.
Can I give a
Yes.
stat on that? So I work for Nielsen. We're a data company, and I can't be on panels without giving you statistics. Here's the context for that. 92% of the population growth that has happened in the United States in the last 15 years has come from people of color.
Yep.
Communities of color. That's African Americans, Hispanic, and Asian consumers. That means that constituents and consumers look different. Multicultural consumers, diverse consumers, people of color, we view content differently. And so we look at content to say, do I see myself and how am I represented? And companies will get that wrong if they do not have people who look like you in those rooms to talk to them about culture. So the flip is the scales have really flipped. Now companies need you guys to decode culture for them. They need you guys to translate culture for them. Number one genre of music in America right now is hip hop and rap. In 2017, rock music was supplanted by hip hop and R&B music as the number one genre of music in the country. The most successful shows on television have casts with people of color at the top of the call sheet. There's a reason why people feel like multicultural consumers drive culture. It's not just because younger people are listening to rap music and putting sriracha on everything, but those are culture cues, right? It is also because 48% of Gen Z are multicultural. 44% of millennials are multicultural. That means that each one of you have a bit of privilege in the fact that you understand the cultures from which you come from, and you need to use that and leverage that in how you talk about what you want to bring to the table, right? That's the part that I think you should bring to the table. The last thing I'll say on privilege, if I can, is that I'm the outlier in this panel in that I'm with agency colleagues, but the ultimate privilege is the person who writes the check, the client. That is the ultimate privilege in our business, right? Because agencies do what we say. The number one way I feel like that people who are in my position on the client side can leverage our privilege is we have to demand that our agencies reflect our own diversity and inclusion practices, and we have to demand that our agencies reflect the consumers that we are trying to reach. When we did our agency of record, our big RFP for agencies, that was a key component for us. We put it into the RFP and we enforced it.
Yeah, and I think you see more clients do that, but I want to say something about that. Why you do this is going to drive who is responsible, the resources you put against it, and what you put into understanding issues and what you do. If doing diversity and inclusion because a client tells you to is not sustainable, I've been there. 15 years ago when we had clients asking for report cards and all of this. And when those clients left their CMO roles and another one rolled through who didn't have the same concern, it wasn't there. Not to mention, it wasn't in the DNA of the company. They hadn't changed their culture. So I think that is a word to agencies. And I also think that if an agency is not ready to be flexible and take advantage of the speed and agility and insights and transformation that come about from, and the innovation that come about from bringing in people who are different. They just need to not do it. You know, just don't do it because you waste people's time, you know, and you can't do it well and it's not sustainable.